At 67, Vince Gill finally confirms the rumors. His is the voice that brought solace to millions with Go Rest High on That Mountain, an anthem for mourning that has resonated across decades, garnering 22 Grammy statues and earning a hallowed spot in the pantheon of country music legends. Vince Gill forged his reputation on sincerity, modesty, and raw emotion. Yet behind the music lie unseen struggles he has contended with, personal tragedies that have deeply influenced his art, and decisions that startled even his most dedicated followers. What he has recently shared adds another profound chapter to a life marked by quiet resilience and steadfast love. Surviving loss, the formative tragedy. Back in 1968, a young Vince Gill, merely 11 years old, was enjoying an idyllic, straightforward childhood in Norman, Oklahoma. His world was a comforting routine of school, family dinners, and the joy of strumming melodies on a small 4-string tenor guitar. His father, J. Stanley Gill, who served as a federal judge but was also a passionate amateur musician, would often join him, fostering his son's budding passion for music. Vince's life was built on the steady, unspoken rhythm of a tight-knit family, until a single devastating phone call altered the course of his life forever. His older half-brother, Bob Cohen, had been in a severe car accident. The trauma was immense. Bob slipped into a coma that stretched on for 3 torturous months. For Vince, who had always idolized his vibrant, adventurous brother, the hospital transformed into a chilling landscape of silence and dread. When Bob eventually awakened, he was profoundly changed. The accident inflicted severe, irreversible brain damage. He lost the ability to speak, to perform basic self-care, or to engage with his surroundings in any significant way. The brother who once ran laughing through fields with Vince, full of life and playful teasing, was gone. In his place was a man imprisoned within a body that no longer responded to him. For the young Vince, this was more than a simple loss. It was a profound tear in the emotional tapestry of his home. Witnessing the silent anguish of his parents, particularly his mother, as they struggled to cope with a son who was physically present but essentially gone, etched a scar on his soul that would endure. Bob lived in this state for another 25 years, passing away in 1993, by which time Vince had become a celebrated figure in music. In that very same year, Vince put out Let There Be Peace on Earth, a Christmas album imbued with immense emotional significance. One track, It Won't Be the Same This Year, served as a direct conduit for his sorrow. The song beautifully articulated the painful void left by a loved one who was lost not just to death, but long before, to life. In later reflections, Vince often revisited that time, stating, "Every single time I perform that song, I see that 11-year-old boy all over again." The tragedy did not simply define his youth, it shaped his very being, informing the gentle quality of his voice and lending his songwriting a profundity that fame and accolades could never replicate, walking away, rejecting a dream opportunity. As the 1980s drew to a close, Vince Gill was a respected presence in Nashville's recording circles. Though household stardom remained elusive, he had contributed guitar work and vocals for Pure Prairie League, even serving as the band's frontman for a period, but his solo efforts hadn't yet found their footing. Under contract with RCA Records, Gill produced 2 albums, The Things That Matter and The Way Back Home, which were critically well regarded, but failed to make a commercial impact. His voice was lauded by critics, and his peers hailed him as a premier guitarist, yet the sales charts were indifferent. In a town where hit records were everything, he was on the verge of being just another tale of unfulfilled potential. Then, an unexpected call arrived that would test the resolve of any artist. Mark Knopfler, the iconic leader of Dire Straits, was offering Vince Gill a spot in the band. At that moment, Dire Straits was among the planet's biggest rock groups, riding the wave of their colossal album Brothers in Arms and selling out stadiums worldwide. Knopfler had long been an admirer of Gill's musical prowess, particularly his smooth guitar technique and the unvarnished honesty in his singing. This wasn't a one-off session gig, it was an invitation to be a full member. It was, for all intents and purposes, the opportunity of a lifetime. Crossover stardom, international tours, and massive arenas. Most musicians would have accepted instantly, but Vince paused, and then he said no. In a later discussion, Gill shed light on the gravity of that choice. "It wasn't a matter of not appreciating their music. I loved it," he explained, "but I understood that if I went down that path, I would never return. I wouldn't be myself anymore. I needed to tell my own stories. I hadn't accomplished that yet." Rejecting the offer was more than a career risk, it was a declaration of identity. For years, during leaner times, he questioned his decision. The financial security would have been a relief, and the fame would have unlocked countless doors. He continued to play smaller clubs, endure long bus tours, and watch from the wings as other artists headlined festivals he was merely opening. But then, in a turn of events that felt like destiny, Vince released When I Call Your Name. The album didn't just succeed, it became a landmark in modern country music. The title song, a tender and poignant ballad, perfectly captured the restrained ache in Gill's voice. It earned him his very first Grammy and launched him into the mainstream. His long-shot bet on himself had paid off. He hadn't taken the shortcut to fame. He had forged his own path. Reflecting on it, he said, "Turning down Dire Straits was about more than a career. It was about being true to myself," he mused. "I would prefer to be myself in a small venue than to be somebody else in a packed stadium." Loving Loudly, a controversial romance that broke the mold. In December 1993, Vince Gill was in Tulsa for the taping of Christmas with Vince Gill, a TV special designed to merge country music's warmth with festive spirit. The producers had arranged for a special guest, Amy Grant, the undisputed icon of contemporary Christian music. Her name alone guaranteed attention, but when she stepped into the rehearsal space, an entirely different energy filled the room. Vince was immediately drawn to her. Amy, who was feeling the strain of a hectic schedule and the relentless gaze of public life, was visibly anxious. Vince, with his characteristic gentle nature, eased the tension with a gentle grin and a simple line she'd always remember. "Hey, unknit that brow, it's going to be okay." The words were straightforward, yet they resonated deeply with her. It wasn't a pickup line, it was an act of kindness. That night, their performance was effortlessly harmonious. Their voices meshed perfectly as if they'd been singing partners for years. It was meant to be a single performance, one song, a fleeting moment. But that moment sowed a seed, subtle but undeniable. Over the following years, their paths would cross for other holiday events. Then Amy asked Vince to contribute to a duet on her next album. The song was House of Love, and while its lyrics were romantic, the true narrative was developing off mic. At the time, both Vince and Amy were married to other people. Vince's marriage to Janice Oliver of the country duo Sweethearts of the Rodeo had lasted over a decade and produced a daughter, Jenny. Amy was married to Christian music artist Gary Chapman. Both relationships were struggling beneath the surface. Vince had felt a growing distance from Janice, caught between a grueling tour life and a yearning for a more profound emotional bond. Amy, for her part, was navigating a turbulent marriage fraught with emotional stress and private struggles hidden from the public eye. Despite the clear spark between them, both Vince and Amy insisted that their relationship remained platonic and respectful. "We were two individuals striving to honor the vows we had made," Amy later stated. Nevertheless, their chemistry was palpable to everyone around them. Fans, the media, and tabloids started to connect the dots. By the late 1990s, the rumors had grown louder. Vince and Janice finalized their divorce in 1997. Amy and Gary went their separate ways 2 years later. The proximity of these events fueled speculation, and the public perception rapidly crystallized into a story of impropriety. The criticism was especially severe for Amy. As a pillar of Christian music, she had cultivated an image based on values that now seemed to contradict her personal choices. Radio stations dropped her music, and disillusioned fans sent scathing letters. For Vince, the condemnation was less overt, but just as hurtful. What was most painful, he would later admit, was that people just assumed the worst about us, and that wasn't the reality. We weren't being reckless, we were being human. After years of carefully managing their public images and private feelings, Vince and Amy were finally married in March of 2000. The wedding took place at his Nashville area home, with about 100 of their closest friends and family present under a clear spring sky. It was a private, heartfelt, and deeply moving ceremony. Amy was in a simple white gown, and Vince was by her side, not as a country superstar or a figure of scandal, but simply as a man who had waited with quiet patience for the right time, standing tall, joining the Eagles, and facing the critics. When Glenn Frey passed away in January 2016, the music world didn't just lose a man, it mourned the void his passing created. Frey was more than just a co-founder of the Eagles. He was a foundational pillar, a defining voice, and a presence that shaped the band's identity from its inception in 1971. Don Henley was unequivocal. "I don't see how we could go out and play without the guy who started the band." For a time, it seemed that this iconic chapter of music history was officially over. But as is often the case, grief created an opening for the unexpected. What most fans were unaware of was Vince Gill's long-standing respect for the Eagles, not just as a fan, but as a peer on a similar journey. During the Eagles' hiatus in the 1980s, Vince and Glenn Frey coincidentally shared the same manager, Larry Fitzgerald. This link provided Gill with a unique perspective on the band's dynamics long before any musical partnership was on the horizon. Over the years, Vince had paid tribute to the Eagles by performing their songs, and had deeply admired their songwriting, often covering I Can't Tell You Why in his own shows. So when the band's renowned manager, Irving Azoff, extended a discreet invitation, the offer was less surprising to insiders who understood the long-standing connections. Vince reportedly didn't hesitate. "When do we leave?" was his response, choosing to embrace the opportunity rather than agonize over the immense legacy he was about to engage with. But this was never about impersonation, it was about honoring a legacy. Vince was clear that his role was not to replace Glenn Frey, an impossible task, but to pay tribute to the music's soul by blending in with humility and respect. Alongside Glenn's son, Deacon Frey, Vince began preparing to join the band's reimagined lineup for the Classic West and Classic East festivals in 2017, with their debut performance slated for Dodger Stadium. The rehearsals were rigorous and emotional. Vince dedicated weeks to mastering the intricate harmonies, instrumental cues, and vocal nuances, aiming to deliver the songs not in his own style, but in the authentic voice of the Eagles. Tracks like Lion Eyes, Take It to the Limit, and Tequila Sunrise were chosen specifically for his vocal character, smooth, melodic, and achingly familiar. When he finally walked onto that stage in Los Angeles, no one knew how the massive crowd would react. The response was immediate and powerful. The audience of over 50,000 met them not with doubt, but with emotional standing ovations. Vince wasn't trying to be Glenn Frey, he was singing the songs with the tenderness and precision they commanded. Don Henley later remarked of Gill, "He knows how to be in a band, perhaps the highest praise possible within a group defined by its unspoken synergy and exacting standards." Still, the move wasn't universally praised. Some purist fans bristled at the notion of a country artist joining a legendary rock band. Pundits questioned if the Eagles had become a glorified tribute act. Vince, true to form, ignored the chatter. "I get it," he told Rolling Stone, "but for me, this is about honoring Glenn, honoring this incredible music, and keeping it alive for the people who cherish it." Weathering the storm, sickness, caregiving, and grace. In 2020, following a routine medical appointment for Vince, his physician offhandedly suggested that his wife, Amy Grant, should also get a checkup. This casual piece of advice resulted in a diagnosis that would change everything. Amy was found to have a rare congenital heart condition known as partial anomalous pulmonary venous return, PAPVR. She required open heart surgery, and the need was urgent. The surgery was successful, but the road to recovery proved to be long and arduous, made even more challenging by the COVID-19 pandemic, which prevented Vince from being at her hospital bedside for several days. Once he was finally permitted to visit, he dropped all other commitments to be with her. "He was my rock, supporting me, never allowing me to feel like I was going through it by myself," Amy later shared with People magazine. His unwavering love was the anchor that saw her through the healing. But just 2 years later, in July 2022, life delivered another blow. Amy had a serious fall from her bicycle near a Nashville golf course, which resulted in a traumatic brain injury. She was knocked unconscious for several minutes. Even with a helmet, her recovery was slow and difficult, involving memory impairment, balance problems, and persistent pain. Vince cleared his schedule without a second thought, canceling 3 concerts. "No stage is more important than seeing her get well," he stated. Throughout this ordeal, he was her dedicated caregiver, her biggest supporter, and her guardian. His classic song, "When My Amy Prays," released years before, took on a new, deeply personal meaning, becoming an anthem for her resilience, her faith, and their unbreakable partnership. These trials didn't just challenge their love, they fortified it. Writing the truth, reinventing his music at 67, with a career spanning decades and a collection of awards that could fill a room, many musicians might choose to rest on their laurels. But Vince Gill is not one of them. At 67, he remains creatively driven. He is no longer writing for the charts, he is writing to process, to reflect, and to document life. "I am writing the most meaningful songs of my career right now," he stated in a 2023 interview. "They may not be the ones that climb the charts, but they're the songs with real substance." This philosophy is perfectly encapsulated in Forever Changed, a poignant 2019 ballad that was inspired inspired by a story of childhood abuse. With his signature high, clear tenor, he channels a story of suffering that, while not his own, is conveyed with profound empathy. "Music is my way of helping other people feel less isolated," he noted. The raw vulnerability of that track, along with others like Worlds Apart and My Kind of Woman, My Kind of Man, demonstrates that his artistic abilities have only grown more profound over time. Vince's songwriting today is built on observation rather than judgment. He watches the world, taking in its sorrows and its simple pleasures, and masterfully translates these observations into music that communicates without needing to be loud. He has consistently rejected commercial shortcuts, welcomed collaborations with younger artists, and rediscovered the simple pleasure of making music. He isn't trying to recapture his past, he is speaking his truth in the here and now. Through tragedy, love, reinvention, and unwavering devotion, Vince Gill has demonstrated that being quiet doesn't signify avoidance. It can signify deep reflection, and when he does choose to speak, he does so with a wisdom that can only be acquired through a life fully lived. What is the one Vince Gill song that has meant the most to you? Share it with us in the comments. We are eager to read your stories, and if you found this story compelling, please give it a like, share it with fellow music lovers, and subscribe for more in-depth stories from the heart of music.